Thank you. My name is Jenna Dotson. I'm the staff scientist here at West Virginia Rivers, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. If you haven't already, please do mute yourself just during the presentation so we can minimize background noise. And then, as you just saw, the webinar is being recorded, so it can be posted to our website afterwards, so you can reference it later. And folks who are not able to attend tonight can view it at a later time as well. We'll have questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free to type your question into the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll answer them at the end. Alternatively, if you would like to come off mute after the end of the presentation and verbally ask your question, we can do that as well. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for this evening. So our presenter is John Wirtz. John retired from DEP last summer. He is a biologist and was with the Watershed Assessment Program for his entire 25-year career with DEP. He was promoted to the Assistant Director of the Division of Water and Waste Management, where he led the Watershed Assessment Branch for the last 11 years that he was there. And in this role, he oversaw the development of water quality and biological monitoring programs, assessment methodologies, 303D lists, and TMDLs. So without further ado, I will pull up the slides and hand it over to John.
All right, thanks, Jenna. Yeah, and thanks for having me today. So yeah, the gist of this is to explain what EPA is proposing to do with the addition of 346 streams. I'll probably be using the term overlist. That's just the term that we used it internally when I was with EP, when EPA would add streams over top of what DEP had proposed. Okay, next slide. So yeah, this is just an outline of what I think I can cover in about 15, 20, maybe 25 minutes. I'll talk about designated uses, and then specifically the aquatic life use, and the methods to assess that use. I'll talk about the tools that the state has used to assess aquatic life use, and then talk about the assessment methodology that DEP has used recently, as well as that of EPA in the recent action. The map you see is basically showing those 346 streams that EPA is adding, proposing to add, as well as some that they are proposing to remove. You'll notice that a lot of these streams being added are in the southern coalfields. That is primarily because that is where DEP had focused their monitoring efforts over the last several years. Okay, next slide. All right, so designated uses. They're sort of like services provided by clean water, like the ability to drink it, the ability to support healthy fish and other aquatic life, the ability to swim in it and not get sick. West Virginia's designated uses are defined in West Virginia State Code, specifically in 47 CSR 2, otherwise known as the Water Quality Standards. The uses mirror those of EPA as they are spelled out in the Clean Water Act. All right, next slide. So the designated uses are described in Chapter 6 of the Water Quality Standards. And EPA's overlist and the focus of today's presentation is just on Category B, the propagation and maintenance of fish and other aquatic life, otherwise known as aquatic life use. And that is the terminology I will use. All right, next slide. This graphic is straight from an EPA website on the Clean Water Act. It's a flow chart, pretty straightforward, but it describes states setting water quality standards. And then they monitor the waters against those standards. They assess that data. They develop a list of impaired and threatened waters, and then they develop TMDLs. So I included this to make 2 points. First, that TMDLs will not get developed until or unless a stream or water is deemed to be impaired. And there's a lot of advantages to being called impaired. You're more eligible to receive 319 money, to uh, restore streams. So some people might think it's bad to be called impaired, but there's lots of benefits to being deemed impaired. Just opens up lots of opportunities to fix those problems. The other point I wanted to make relates to the standards that states develop, in that they have both numeric standards, and in the case of aquatic life use, there is narrative. So there's narrative and numeric. Numeric standards being something like pH has to always be between 6 and 9, or that iron needs to be below 1 or 1.5 milligrams per liter. Whereas narrative are what they sound like. I'll go to the next slide, please. So here are West Virginia's narrative water quality standards, straight from 47 CSR2, the water quality standards. Chapter 3 describes these conditions not allowable, and highlighted are the sections that DEP bases their aquatic life use assessments on. The gist is no significant adverse impact to the biological components of aquatic ecosystems shall be allowed. And on the 303D list, these use impairments are identified as CNA, or conditions not allowed biological. So you'll see that on the 303D list. All right, next slide. And basically this and the next few slides are just getting into how DEP and other states assess aquatic life use and have done so over the years, or how they assess the narrative, this significant adverse impact. All right, next slide. So as with most states, West Virginia started its biological monitoring program in its current form in the 1990s, and specifically with the formation of the Watershed Assessment Program in 1995. DEP first listed streams as biologically impaired in 1998. They used what they called a biological condition to assess the aquatic life use. Basically, it is a comparison of the benthic macroinvertebrate community to those of a reference stream, or minimally impacted streams. These are selected, not looking at the biology, but looking at the watershed to see what impacts there might be. So no permitted discharges are allowed. No large disturbing land uses are allowed. So these are minimally impacted streams that the sample is compared to. And that's really the basis of most aquatic life assessment tools. And it's the same underlying concept used in both WESC and GLIMPS tools that I will get to in just a minute. Another term that I'll use is IBI, Index of Biotic Integrity. That's what WESC and GLIMPS and this initial biological condition were. Those are IBIs. And that's really what all states use to assess. All right, next slide. Basically just showing the cover of our development document for the West Virginia Stream Condition Index. So you've heard people mention the WESC. This is what they are referring to. It was developed in 2000, or finalized in 2000, on an effort between EPA and DEP, based on DEP data collected in the first couple of years of the Watershed Assessment Program. This is a family level IBI. I'll talk more about that as we move on. I guess next slide. In the beginning of the Watershed Assessment Program, we started small, but then we did expand fairly quickly. We initially were able to identify and process these benthic macroinvertebrate samples in-house. But as we got to collecting 400 or 500 samples a year, we realized we would need to contract that out. So we sought bids, and basically what we realized is that you can identify samples to genus level for not a whole lot of additional money compared to family level. We knew we would gain a whole lot more information by doing so. So in 1998, we started identifying our samples to genus level. So it's 25 years of genus level data we've had, and we're still arguing about the use of it or not. So yeah, basically, yeah, just a whole lot more information gained with very little additional money. Next slide. This is just an example of kind of what you do gain, kind of visual. You can, on the left, there's the family level. So it's the same sample we're looking at. On the left, it's identified to family, and on the right, it's identified to the genus level. So there are characteristics for every genera with specific tolerance values that are used in calculating the individual metrics of an IBI. Family level tolerances are simply averages of the more specific values of the genera within that family. For example, the family heterogeneity, I think there's maybe 10 genera listed in the database, and they range from a very intolerant or very sensitive taxa with a tolerance value of 1, it's a scale of 1 to 10, so the most sensitive, all the way up to a more moderate tolerance value of 5. Mm-hmm. The whole family is generally sensitive, but you can see the variation within the family when you go to genus level data. And yeah, similarly, all the other families, you just gain a lot more information when you go genus. I looked at our database just to see the numbers. Mm-hmm. And there are 72 families that are currently identified from samples in West Virginia at the family level, and 649 genera. So it's nearly tenfold increase in the number of taxa that you have to basically gain information from. All right, next slide. All right, this is basically just the cover of the GLIMPS document. GLIMPS stands for the Genus Level Index of Most Probable Stream Status. Got a little overboard with trying to come up with an acronym, but it is easy to say, and I don't know, I guess it works. But it was developed over the course of several years through a collaboration of DEP and EPA scientists from their Wheeling lab. It was reviewed by a group of local and national experts and was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and that was published in 2010. And I should add that GLIMPS is not a single IBI or a single tool, but rather it has several individual IBIs that are designed for different regions, different seasons, and in one for the mountains region, it also has a large river IBI. So it's not a single IBI, but a set of genus level IBIs. All right, next slide. Okay, just more on some history of the use of benthic data for 303D listings. As I said previously, we first listed with biological data in 1998. In 2000, I don't recall why, but we did not submit a 303D list. I think a lot of programs were undergoing a lot of change at that time, so I don't think EPA was pushing. But WIFSCI, the West Virginia Stream Condition Index family level, was used in 2002, 04, 06, 08, and in 2010. But EPA did state at that time that they expected DP should utilize genus level data by 2012. Around 2011, legislature steps in and they passed Senate Bill 562, which directed DEP to develop assessment methodology for aquatic life use, and it had to be approved by the legislature. I could have a whole other talk about 562 and the efforts that DEP went to deal with that, but I'll, I'll save that for another day. Anyhow, with that Senate Bill 562, DEP basically claims that they can't add new streams for the 2012 list. So they don't add any new biological listings. But EPA says, well, we recognize that, but we still have the duty to utilize all available data, and they overlisted, but not on glimpse. Rather, they used WebSki. But they didn't use what we called a gray zone, kind of a zone of uncertainty that they had deemed to be not scientifically supportable. So again, they overlisted first in 2012. Then in 2014, EPA overlist based on the genus level glimpse. Yeah, and as they had said they would do since it was first developed. In 2016, we had a change in the federal administration, and EPA reverts to allowing the use of WebSki. And that is what the EPA used, and EPA approved another change in federal administration, and this proposed overlist based on glimpse. So that's the gist of where we are, and that is what EPA has proposed. It's overlisting again based on the glimpse or genus level data. And I'll add more with the next slides. Okay, this is just the comment that EPA made in the approval of the 2010 303D list, saying so this is the first time where EPA made the point of saying that West Virginia should use all available data, specifically this genus level data. All right, next slide. All right, these next few slides are some of the specific shortcomings of the family-based WebSki and the improvements that the genus level index makes to address them. Yeah, so his first one is glimpse is region specific, whereas WebSki is a single tool or single IBI that is applicable statewide. It does not differentiate between mountains and the plateau, like streams over towards the Ohio River. It's the same tool, assesses all of that. Whereas glimpse, you can go to the next slide to visualize this, was regionalized, so it has different IBIs for the mountains, and the mountains being both the Central Appalachians and Ridge and Valley ecoregions. So that's the mountains, and then the Western Allegheny Plateau is the plateau in WIMP's terminology. So there's IBIs for both. All right, next slide. All right, so not only are there regional improvements, but there are seasonal improvements. WebSki has a single long index period, runs all the way from April 15th through October 15th. And if you know much about the stream bugs, you'll know that they hatch out certain times of year. So it is difficult to compare the community collected in April to that collected in the middle of the summer or the fall. So glimpse is seasonalized. It's got currently spring, summer, and winter seasons and unique IBIs to each of those periods. It was, in looking at, as glimpse was being developed, there were distinct differences. And so having different IBIs addresses those differences. So that's another improvement. All right, next slide. Kind of related to the first one, but it's glimpse provides a longer sampling period. And this can be important for really anybody that is monitoring, including industry. WebSki is limited to use, like I said, between April and October. Glimpse just simply allows for a much longer period. You have season appropriate reference samples, and reference sets, data sets to compare. So you can collect really almost any time of the year, November being the only month where it would not be appropriate to collect or utilize GLIMPs. And you really don't want to be sampling in November anyhow, because you would simply get a bunch of leaves along with your bugs. But yeah, you would not want to pay to process that or process it yourself. So again, yeah, extended sampling period. All right, next slide. And I've already talked about the advantages of the more specific taxonomy. There's just simply a lot more information when you go from family to genus. Yeah, I mean, that's why we decided to pay the extra money to get that genus level data, and it just provides so much more information. So that's kind of probably the biggest difference and most important. All right, next slide. There had been questions about the use of Wevsky on large streams, since most of the reference sites used for comparison came from small streams. So during the development of GLIMPs, we did look at that, and we were able to come up with a reference set of larger streams and big enough that we were able to develop an IBI for larger streams, and larger streams being those that are greater than 60 square miles. And it's only applicable to the mountain region. The plateau, we do not have an IBI for that for large streams, largely because we couldn't find adequate number of large reference quality streams. Also, we don't have a lot of large stream samples. They tend to be flat and not appropriate for sampling riffle or benthic macroinvertebrates from riffle habitat. All right, well, let me add something. Yeah, there's no slide for this next point, but one of the main or most obvious reasons for using genus level data compared to family is that it works better. I mean, by that, it identifies stressors better. During the development of GLIMPs, single stressor samples were identified, meaning sites that were deemed to only be stressed by one thing, be that low pH from acid rain, excess nutrients, or fecal coliform, or metals toxicity, or conductivity. And GLIMPs worked better at identifying these impairments in every scenario, except metals toxicity, where they both correctly identified 100% of the sites as impaired. So it just works better. I mean, that's kind of the gist of why it was developed, to address shortcomings of the family-based Wevsky. All right, next slide. It's just a visual that shows that West Virginia has and proposes to continue to use the low end percentile. It's a fifth percentile of all reference sites to set the impairment threshold. So the slide we're looking at now from right to left that's a distribution of all Wevsky scores for reference sites. So you can see that there are reference sites that score as low as 60, and they go all the way up to near 100. So the threshold is set at a low end of this distribution. Many states use a much higher percentile, 10th, 25th even, but both DP and EPA felt it was appropriate for West Virginia to use a low end threshold because of the quality of our reference sites. We do have more minimally impacted streams than most surrounding states. All right, next slide. Basically just showing the same thing, that for GLIMPs, it's the threshold was set the same way. It's still this fifth percentile of season, region, and size appropriate reference sites. You may notice that it's maybe odd to you that it's 100 for, even though it's multiple IBIs. Basically, the individual IBIs were adjusted so that 100 is the threshold across all those different IBIs. So when you see a score, it should be labeled as percent of threshold. If it's greater than 100, it exceeds the threshold. If it's less than, it's deemed impaired. And that is the way EPA added these streams. They didn't have any kind of gray zone. A single sample that was less than a score of 100 was deemed to be impaired. All right, next slide. I don't know. You may hear people argue that, well, Websky and Glimpse are really, they almost tell you the same thing. So why bother? And in fact, in 90% of the samples, they do provide the same answer. 67% of the time, they both say a sample is good. 23% of the time, they agree that they're bad. But we have 47,000 assessment units in the state. So the remaining 10% are significant. And I should add that these 8% that the Glimpse identifies as impaired that Websky doesn't, those are the streams that are only moderately impaired and those that have the best chance of being restored. So I think that might be a good comment to include EPA. These streams that Websky is missing are those that we can most likely bring back to attainment with a little bit of work or attention. All right, next slide. Let's see. This is just basically a summary of the points that I've already made as to why Glimpse is the better tool to assess aquatic life use. Again, it might be some good information here to include in any comments that you want to submit to EPA. Yeah, basically, it's just, yeah, I think I had written this to my leadership at the time. Most of these slides were presented to leadership as I was trying to, as everybody in watershed assessment, trying to get them to utilize Glimpse over the years with mixed success. All right, we can go on the next slide. All right. It's a busy slide, but yeah, this is, well, I'll go back. Basically, this is how DP addressed Senate Bill 562. They did develop legislative rules. They put it out for comment 3 different times, but they never finalized it. Sure, some of you submitted comments on those draft. Well, they weren't draft. They were rules that we put out for comment. But EPA made DEP aware that these rules would be considered a change to water quality standards, and they would have the duty to review and approve or disapprove the rule. The proposed rules utilize Websky, and EPA had made clear that they wanted DEP to utilize all available data, in other words, Glimpse. So leading up to the development of the most recent 303D list, DEP developed an internal assessment methodology that was not part of water quality standards and therefore didn't need to be reviewed. So EPA had the opportunity to comment, or EPA's opportunity to comment was delayed until DEP submitted their 303D list based on this methodology, which led us to where we are now, EPA overlisting or adding 346 streams. Yeah, so the flow chart basically just is from that assessment methodology that DEP developed. And there's a couple interesting things. One is that they actually use Glimpse, but only in a very limited kind of tiebreaker scenario. And I would say that the most problematic part of this process is when streams are automatically deemed to be an impairment based on a Websky greater than 72. So that upper right side of this graphic. A one-time score greater than 72, you never get looked at again. The genus level data does not get looked at. And the majority, if I would say almost all of the streams that EPA is now saying are impaired are streams in that category that got deemed as attaining with a single Websky score of a 72. Okay, next slide. All right, this is just some information that the EPA has on their biological monitoring programs. A lot of good information, but the purpose of it being here is to show you that individuals can get the specific IBI metric scores for every sample collected in the state. That lower right of the graphic is actually not where it is. I moved it up on for the slides, but you have to scroll down on this page a little bit to see this. But that WAB, Watershed Assessment Branch, benthic macroinvertebrate data quality reporting tool will take you or give you the ability to basically query out all the biological data, all the benthic macroinvertebrate data collected statewide. So these may be helpful in developing watershed-specific comments. And the next slide will, so this is what you see when you go to the tool. You have to pick the county and the watershed and then hit display report. I'm not sure why we have both county and watershed. So some watersheds may have to do this a couple times to use the multiple counties. And when you hit display report, an Excel spreadsheet will get downloaded. And when you try to open it, you likely will get this error. I always have, but you just ignore it, open it anyway, and you'll get a spreadsheet with the site information, the date, mile point, what watershed it's in, county, which IBI. So in some cases, you'll see it only has Websky. It doesn't have Websky/glimpse, and that's generally because it's old. 96, 97, and some 98s. And I said we identified samples in 98 to genus, but not all of them. So in addition to that information, we have the individual index score. So the Websky score shown there in blue, but also it has all the individual metrics that are used to calculate the index. And you can't see the rest of it, but if you scroll over to the right, you would get the glimpse IBI score, and then there's a whole lot more metrics. Not every metric is used in every IBI. I think there's, I don't know how many metrics shown here, but each of the genus level IBIs has, I think, between 7 and 9 metrics that make up the index. I think that's all I wanted to say there. All right, next slide. Okay, and this is just the tool that EPA put out to identify the waters. It is pretty useful. So at this point, I don't know if Jenna, you want to actually go to the live? Yeah. And I'll let her drive a little bit just to show what kind of information is on that site. I'm not seeing it. I don't know if
Oh, sorry. Okay,
the other.
there you go.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, and there's I don't know. It's good information. You can zoom in on a site. You can click it and then you get stream information. You can get the sample information that led to EPA's overlist or removal. I mean, I guess I can call them. Yeah, so you have in orange, it's those that EPA is adding, and the blue streams are those that are proposing to take away. Yeah, that's about all. I guess I will say that this tool does not give you the family level scores. So if you wanted to look at those to compare to like what Websky score it got, you can go to that DEP tool to get the WESCI information. Yeah, that's probably all I wanted to show there. But yeah, you can change base maps, so you can zoom in, see aerials or topographic maps, or yeah, it just helps you if you're trying to identify your particular stream. Yeah, I really don't have much more on the slide. It just included a yeah. So there's the different base maps you can click to help see where your streams of interest may be. Yeah, the remaining slide really is just how to comment, and it was straight from EPA's website. It's got the address, yeah, for Greg Voigt. That's who comments need to go to. They are due October 18th. Yeah, you can do it via email or snail mail. Yeah, I think that's about all I have. So yeah, I'd open it up to questions from anyone. Discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I will add that I assume these slides will be shared, and there are a lot of good links throughout that may be useful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we will share the slides.
I have a question, if it's okay.
Okay.
Yep. So we're here in Sweet Springs, and it's the Sweet Springs Watershed Association. It's comprised of Cove Creek, and then a plethora of various streams coming off Peters Mountain, flowing into Dunlap Creek. Now these maps are showing impaired streams, but I was wondering if there's an area where we could find a list of all streams in West Virginia, whether they be impaired or not impaired, because we don't know if they've just been ignored and therefore they're not on any map, or if they've never been tested and nobody knows they're here.
Gotcha. I would say the best place to look is at the story map that DEP put together for this recent assessment cycle. And the way to get to that is if you go to West Virginia DEP's main page and search, just put in 303D, and go to the section on integrated report. Integrated meaning it integrates the 303D list with the 305B report.
Okay.
And there's a section in there. Okay, great. Thanks, Jenna. Or whoever added that.
She must have sent a little story map link.
I think I saw it pop up in the chat. But yeah,
Yes,
it's
I see
got
it. It's right there.
a mapping component. That's really, you can see what has never been assessed. And that's obviously the majority of our 47,000 assessment units. Most of them are very small headwater streams that don't have data. But you can also see where streams have been determined to be impaired and by what criteria they were impaired by.
Okay, now we lost them. Thank you.
I have that pulled up, John. It might be helpful to do a little demo on that if you want to share your screen.
The integrated report is here.
You want me to share? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think if you could just walk through what you just explained,
Yeah.
because the links
Yep.
get a little confusing.
Yep. All right, can you show up?
Yes.
Okay. So down here on the left is stream maps, and it may take a minute to explore or to load, but not too bad. And of course, my still don't. Yeah, and the legend. So no streams are highlighted yet. Okay, so that's basically that is our integrated report right there. And if you break that out, it's got these numbers. 2 is attaining most uses. Everything else is impaired. 4A are TMDL developed. 4C, they're impaired but don't require a TMDL. That's a very small subgroup. So let me turn that one off. You can get specific, like aquatic life use. That's what we're primarily talking about today. Insufficient information does not mean there's no data. According to DEP's methodology, you can get left not making a decision. And that's what these gray streams are. But yeah, for each case, you can click on it, get a lot of information. Okay, that just tells you what watershed. And if, like, to answer specifically that question, if you wanted to know if there is data that's ever been sampled, these unassessed streams, that's the gray. So we turn everything off except that. There's a lot of unassessed data or unassessed streams. You can't get to every little headwater stream. Yeah, I mean, you could spend a lot of time in here. I will say that's a great tool to identify streams if you're communicating with DEP. We go back to, and I say that because they've got these codes that are particularly useful. Yeah, in this case, it's got both. We used to call it AN code or alphanumeric code. In this case, it's called the West Virginia code. And it's got this newer, which is more detailed. This would probably be the better one to use. But that coding is specific to that assessment unit, not repeated anywhere. So if you ever want to know specific information about the back fork of Elk River, or really more practically, Laurel Fork. I don't know, I could probably find one pretty quick, but that's not very helpful when you say Laurel Fork. Even if you say Laurel Fork of Elk River drainage, there's still a bunch of them. So really try to use those codes and you'll have better luck. So if nothing else, this tool is good for that. What else? Yeah, so similar information is in both the worm and trout. I don't know, maybe it's better just, yeah. Are there questions specifically on this or on anything else, I guess?
There was a question that popped up in the chat here. How long do we estimate it will take for DEP to develop TMDLs for all currently listed streams?
It's not a simple answer. DEP historically has done TMDLs on a large watershed basis. So they, I don't know, like a Huck 8 level watershed. I think that question from John, he's over in Blue Ridge. We have not spent much time over there. So I don't know. And obviously I know less now that I've retired what their plan is, but it does take a while to get around statewide. They have developed TMDLs, I think, in every watershed now at least once, have gone through and developed TMDLs a second and even third time in some watersheds. So I guess I should add that. A lot of the cases, including these 346 streams that EPA has added, already have TMDLs. And DEP will be responding to EPA's overlist. They will say the current TMDL addresses this biological impairment. So for all of these 346, DEP has gone through their stressor identification process. And if the stressor identified from the bugs has a water quality TMDL, I believe DEP will say, no, this biological impairment is already covered. and it wouldn't be Category 5 or the 303D impaired stream proper. It would go to basically Category 4C or 4A, sorry. TMDL has already been developed to address the problem. So I have no idea what percent, but there will be, I'm guessing a majority actually, because there are TMDLs done statewide already, at least to some extent, that a lot of these will be whatever we call TMDL covered. So I don't know when they will get to the Shenandoah again and get to those streams. Yeah, just it's a good question for DEP.
Great, thanks, John. Are there any other questions? You can feel free to come off mute and ask them verbally, or if you prefer to type them in the chat, that's fine as well. Or comments. Okay, I will say that, oh, Maggie read my mind. She just put it in the chat. So we talked a lot about comments that watershed groups could potentially include if they were interested in submitting comments to EPA on this issue, but we've also developed an action alert for individuals to let EPA know that they support their decision of having DEP use the more specific genus level method as John described. So that action alert was just popped in the chat. So we encourage you to go ahead and take that action if you would like to contact EPA. And then if you are with a watershed group and would prefer to send an organizational letter, you can also take a look at some of the language that's used in that action alert and kind of adapt it to include some more specific language about the streams in your watershed that may be overlisted. And if you need any help with that, again, John and I's emails are in the chat and we would be happy to help you out. So if there are no more questions, then I just want to thank everyone for coming this evening, and we will be in touch with the recording. And again, if you have any questions as far as comment development, or if you're poking around on some of the maps and you're getting a little confused, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to help you. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody. Oh, we did get one question here, John, even though people are coming up. Would you like to address it?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that the watershed assessment branch did almost no radioactive monitoring, very limited to some analysis of some fracked flowback water we did. So I don't have a good answer. I really, it wouldn't be watershed assessment branch. At least, yeah, they are not currently. So that part is accurate. I don't know if there's other parts of DEP that are doing a better job.
Okay, thanks. And that was the answer to Sally's question. She had said, I recently read about streams being polluted with radioactive materials that are not currently looked at by DEP. Is that correct? And would the benthic population be affected?
Yeah, I would say at high enough levels, I'm sure aquatic life would be affected.
Alrighty. Any other lingering questions? Alrighty. If not, have a good evening again, everyone, and reach out at any time. Thanks all for joining.